Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?
Well, hi, everybody. This is Rob Godlewski back with the Think Small podcast. And this afternoon, our guest is Dr. Darrick Carter. Darrick is the founder and CEO of PAI Life Sciences based in the Seattle, Washington area. Dr. Carter, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So it's a really interesting business and healthcare problem you're solving here. So let's dig in. First of all, tell us about what PAI Life Sciences does and what problems you're solving for your patients and clients.
Yeah, so PAI Life Sciences started as Protein AI about 20 years ago, and we were going to be an artificial intelligence company, but artificial intelligence hadn't arrived yet, really, certainly in terms of investment. And so we had programmed some neural nets to do autonomous discovery of biotech targets. And we tried to use them, but without substantial financing, we couldn't use them on very big genomic data sets. So we selected something that we thought was important, but that was small enough that our computer could deal with it. And that happened to be leprosy. And so we used our artificial neural nets to discover something in leprosy. And the company kind of evolved from there. We did discover some targets in leprosy, and we used those targets to make the first approved screening test for leprosy in the world. It was launched in Brazil in 2013. And then our company, instead of being known as an AI company, it got known as a neglected disease company. And so our funders started funding us to do work on diseases of the poor. And we changed our tagline to serving the underserved rather than, discovering new things with artificial neural nets. And so since then, we've now moved into clinical trials for some what we feel are very understudied diseases and diseases that don't get enough funding because the funding is not proportional to the amount of suffering they cause in the world.
Interesting. So your business literally got, or how do I put this? Your business pivoted accidentally.
Well, out of necessity, we went with, where ultimately the funding came from. But then we kind of realized that, doing something good in the world is also has its own benefits. And so we started embracing being a neglected disease company. And I think a lot of people who work here, they don't just work here for the paycheck, but they work here because they feel what we're doing is important.
And exactly what is that again? So you're developing testing protocols for diseases for the underserved. Is that correct?
No, we actually make products. So one of the lead product is a vaccine for a disease called schistosomiasis. Now, I could ask you, have you ever heard of this disease?
I think I have.
Many people would say no. And then, if I ask them, have you heard of tuberculosis or have you heard of malaria? People will say, yeah, right?
Sure.
Well, schistosomiasis threatens 1 billion people a year in the world. And at any point in time, 150 million are infected with this disease. It's a terrible disease caused by worms. And, that's why we call it a neglected disease, because only the people who are affected by it still really seem to know that it exists. Most people here in developed countries just have never heard of it, even though it affects, a huge proportion of the world's population. So, we think it's important from that aspect. But, as a scientist and as a biochemist, I'm also fascinated by the worm itself. This worm, you may have seen these pictures in Africa of these kids with these big bloated stomachs.
Certainly.
A lot of times these kids are affected by schistosomiasis because the eggs from the worm that sits on your liver and on your spleen, and it causes inflammation that causes them to enlarge, and it causes this big bloating of the abdomen. And so, it causes terrible suffering in that way. But the worm itself is scientifically interesting because the male and the female are connected by their genital tracts, and they live in a state called incopula, which I don't know if you'd want to live in that state all your life, but basically they're constantly producing fertilized eggs. So the female produces the eggs and the male fertilizes them, and then they get spit into your bloodstream where they circulate and they sit on the liver and cause this inflammation.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and of course, it's not pleasant. It doesn't feel very good when you have this. And what's very interesting about the disease is that we don't develop immunity to it, but the way it evades immunity is very different from like COVID, where you know that these strains keep changing. The worm doesn't do that. What it does is it redirects our immune system into kind of a stealth mode where our immune system doesn't recognize that it's infected. And so the crazy thing is you can treat the parasite with a drug called praziquantel, but it keeps coming back every time you re-encounter it. You don't develop immunity. And so there's these car washers in Madagascar. What happens is people, unlike here where you drive into your little car wash and you get sprayed with all kinds of cool colors. In Madagascar, these car washers, they push your car into a lake and then they wash it and then they pull it back out. And what happens during that is the people's bare feet as they go into the lake are exposed to these small parasites. And these are the worms in a different stage that penetrate through your skin, and then they infect you that way. So they live in the lake and reinfect you every time. And so these car washers can get the diseases. There's cases where they've had it 25 times in their life.
Oh my gosh. But your pharmaceutical, your drug actually treats this.
So the drug that is out there is actually very good, praziquantel. It's relatively low cost and it has few side effects. It has a couple of problems because it doesn't completely cure you of worms. It cures you of the pathology, so you don't show symptoms anymore. But about 30% of the worms survive in your body.
Oh gosh.
So that's one bad thing about it. And then, as I said, you will constantly need to be retreated. And in areas where there's a lot of poverty, getting the drug to the people who need it is a big, big problem, especially now that USAID is out of the picture. They were one of the prime groups that distributed praziquantel in the world. And so now it's going to get even worse. So ours is a vaccine. So you would come in, maybe get 2 shots, and hopefully be prevented from ever getting the disease again. And our vaccine is designed to unmask. So when I talked about how the worm disguises itself, we shift the immune system into a different state where it can see the worm. And so we've shown this in monkeys that we can protect them. What's also interesting is baboons actually get the disease in nature similar to the way humans get it. And so it's a very good model. And we've shown that we can prevent in these baboons, completely prevent disease after a couple shots. So we're hoping that that's going to translate. And what's also kind of cool is that the vaccine only kills the female worms preferentially. And so, as I told you before, they are stuck together by their genital tracts. Well, when the female dies, the male goes into kind of a weird hypnotic state. It doesn't cause pathology, but it keeps circulating in your blood. And that's great because it still provides the vaccine antigen. And so what we think is going to happen is with just a couple of shots, you might be completely protected for the rest of your life because you keep having these circulating male worms. You don't show any disease symptoms, but the worms essentially are providing booster shots for you. And we've shown this because we found a monkey that we had used in our modeling studies. We don't kill these animals when we're done. We donate them to zoos. And we were able to retrieve one of them 8 years later, and they still had protective immunity against the worm. And so we think that this model of what we think is going on is probably happening in the real world.
So how many different diseases do you have solutions for then in these underserved areas?
So we have a couple. So the one I just talked about was our most advanced one. It's entering what's called phase 2 trials soon, which we usually go through 3 trial stages in order to get approval. We have one for a disease called lymphatic filariasis or elephantiasis, which is another terrible disease. It causes these big, I don't know if you've ever seen these horrible pictures of people with basically elephant-like legs. And it's because the worms, they start sitting in the immune privileged sites in your legs, and they cause this extreme swelling of the extremities. There are pictures that are relatively off-putting of people with their testicles that are hanging down to their knees because they're full of worms. So elephantiasis is also a big problem. Over 100 million people affected. In this case, more in Southeast Asia than in Africa. And our vaccine for that, we're undergoing manufacturing for it in order to apply to the FDA for our first phase 1 trial in that vaccine. And then the third one that's most advanced is our river blindness vaccine. So it's a disease called onchocerciasis, where again these are worms, but they affect your eyes and they ultimately cause blindness. And you can see pictures these people in extreme poverty where their children are leading them by a stick because they can't see anything anymore. So, it causes untold suffering. Those are our most advanced candidates. We also have been using the knowledge that we've gained in developing vaccines and shifting the way the immune system works. We've been applying that now to cancer. So we're working in a number of cancer indications, and notably in soft tissue sarcoma. These sarcomas, some of them don't have very good treatments, so the outcomes are really bad for most patients. And we've shown that when we inject our immune stimulant into these sarcomas, that we can unmask them to the body, and the body starts treating the sarcoma as a foreign body and starts attacking it. And so these indications we're going in for first world applications. So we're trying to, help with neglected diseases as well with cancer now.
Wow, that's just an amazing path. And to think that when you started back in 2004, you wanted to be an artificial intelligence company 20 years before AI was even a word.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Well, and that's why,
go ahead.
Yeah, that's why we couldn't get any funding for it. And
right.
Ultimately, our company, Protein AI, I think around 2015 or so, I got sick of people asking why it has AI in the name when we're doing neglected diseases. And so we squished the letters together to form PAI Life Sciences.
I love it. It's a great, company history story for sure. So tell us about the, different points in the journey, right? As you're starting off, let's say we're past the, we're no longer an AI focused artificial intelligence type of medical company, but we're starting down this journey of developing medicines, vaccines, pharmaceuticals, and drugs for underserved diseases, or diseases for the underserved. Tell us about that. I'm sure there were times when revenue was ramping up and you got some great, news from trials and successes in the field and things. But tell us about times when, revenue was contracting, things seemed like they were going a little bit backwards. How did you, what was that situation? How did you pivot, and how did you move the business forward?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think that's probably true of most businesses, but as a business owner, you don't like it when it contracts, even though that's probably the natural cycle of any business that's around for a certain amount of time, that you're going to get expansion and contraction. After the leprosy test launch, we had a bit of a dearth of funding because we hadn't yet fully pivoted into that space where we got these other vaccines. And so I had to lay off people, and I really didn't enjoy that. I mean, we were down to 2 people, and just tried to take in some laundry. We had biotech labs, which is nice. And so we worked with a cosmetics company and developed a patch to eliminate wrinkles that actually worked. It was kind of cool. It had a battery and used electric fields to press cosmetic drugs into the skin. And so that paid the bills for a little while. We also rented some of our space to another company so that, we could defray some of the overhead costs.
Really getting
and then,
creative then.
Yeah, well, you either survive or die, right? So,
that's right.
And then, these other vaccines, we got funding first from a little bit of funding from the NIH, but it wasn't enough to get the vaccine through. So we kind of, shaking, we took a $500,000 loan from a kind of a crediting company, and started continuing the research using loaned money. And then luckily the Gates Foundation stepped in and they gave us another grant to help with the funding. So that gave us enough funding to get up to the phase 1 stage. And then it got more interesting because, there's what they call in biotech the valley of death, which is the area between when you have like scientific proof of concept and when you start entering human trials. And the reason that valley is so difficult to traverse is people get excited about you doing discovery, so you can get government grants, and so you do the science. And people get excited once you're in humans because they say, okay, now this is becoming a product. But in between the two, there's a disconnect where you're spending lots of money because you have to do what's called GMP manufacturing, which is good manufacturing practice, manufacturing and release of your product. You have to do good laboratory practice, toxicology, and these studies can be up to $1 million each. And they don't give you great scientific discoveries, and they don't move you far into human trials. So people don't really like funding that valley, and getting through that valley of death has been an issue for a lot of companies. They may have great ideas, and they were funded initially to show those ideas work, and they did, but then they hit this like area where nobody wanted to fund getting into humans. And a lot of VCs are going to tell you, hey, show me human data, then I'll fund you. But you're like, well, how can I do that if I don't get through that valley?
So is that a matter of
challenge?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's been a challenge. That's all I want to say.
Okay. So is it just a matter of I hate to say it this simply, but educating the investment community about the different stages and the existence of this valley, and that you need that funding to get through that valley of death, and as you call it. I would think that with a little bit of education, some grants and VC funding might be a little bit more willing to take a risk on.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an education thing. Most VCs know about this. I mean,
Okay.
they know that's an area, and it's almost like a common term in biotech, the valley of death.
Huh.
But I can see where they're coming from, which is, I'm going to give you $5 million, and at the end of the $5 million, you're going to be at an IND stage, which is the investigational new drug stage, where you approach the FDA with, here's my package, can I do human trials? And so there's no value inflection to that for the investors. They just spent $5 million, and theoretically you haven't gotten anywhere because you haven't shown anything. And so the real value inflection comes when you go into your phase 1, phase 2 trial, when you show it's safe in humans in phase 1, and then you start getting hints of efficacy in phase 2. That's when the big value comes in, because now you're like, okay, I had this great new concept. It didn't kill anybody. And look, it's starting to work. And now a drug that, took you 10, 15 million to develop is worth 100 million because you've shown it works.
So literally just getting past or over that hump of the valley of death and into human trials, and ultimately, obviously, getting past, those human trials successfully. That's when, in your world, that's when success really happens. Yes,
that's right. And
okay.
And there's so few that make it past that bar. I think it's they kind of say, I think there's like, from every 20 concepts that go in, there's about 2 that make it to phase 2 trials. So it's
Okay.
about a 10% gate that actually goes through to that. And then even those get whittled down once you actually look at large scale efficacy.
But you've been successful in this a number of times with these different vaccines or drugs, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we
Okay.
have a good success story or success history, and hope to continue doing that in our field. And if our schistosome vaccine is successful, it's nice to at some point in 20, 30 years go into retirement and say, hey, look, this thing that I developed, and it's helping hundreds of millions of people every year. I mean, that's kind of a nice feeling to have. I mean, it was interesting for me. I went in for my shingles shot. I'm at that age now.
Welcome to the club.
I had worked on the adjuvant that's in that shot. So I had helped develop the Shingrix vaccine. And the pharmacist came out and he's like, you know anything about this shot? And I said, yeah, no, I helped develop it. And he's like, oh, then it'll hurt.
Oh my gosh.
I laughed.
You actually helped develop the
Yeah,
shot you were about to receive.
that's right. That's kind of a nice feeling, right? It's something you worked on, and you know it's helping a lot of people, and it ultimately ends up in your own body, which is kind of cool.
Wow. Wow. I bet you that was a full circle moment for you, I'm sure.
Well, especially he wasn't very impressed. He was just like, "Yeah, then you know it's going to hurt."
Ha! I'm pretty sure, Dr. Carter, that he, after your visit with him, he probably sat back and went, "Holy cow, what did I just hear?" This guy just invented a component of the shot I just gave him. That's pretty wild. Well,
Well,
so
it's
so
been a
then
childhood
talk.
dream. I wanted to be a chemist
Yeah,
from early on, and I always wanted to see something I developed go into a pharmacy. So it's nice.
that's incredible. So let's talk about that part of the business, right? You've got something past the human trials. You've got a drug that's being manufactured and produced and distributed. What does that look like when you're ramping up production and ramping up the business itself? Not only from the operational standpoint, but talk to us about the human impact as well.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't been that in. A lot of times. So, for example, with the shingles vaccine, GSK bought the company I was working at, and they scaled it and commercialized it. So Shingrix
Okay,
is a GSK product now.
I
Um,
gotcha.
with the one that I can talk about is a vaccine for COVID. So our company developed the first approved self-amplifying RNA for COVID. So it was the third approved RNA in the world behind Moderna and BioNTech, and it got launched in India through emergency use approvals.
Okay.
And the engineering side of it was pretty interesting because it wasn't something I had dealt with before. We were producing it in the lab at the liter scale, and they had to produce, they wanted to produce it at 30 million doses per lot. So each time they manufactured one lot, they wanted to make about 30 million doses. And, that translates to thousands of liters. And so how do you go from one to 1,000? It's not as trivial as you would think. You can't just take the same process you did in the lab and suddenly do the same thing, only bigger. And one of the things that really struck me is that in order to make these particles, we had to do a blending step. And we essentially used, kind of like a stand mixer like you would have at home in order to pre-blend the material. Well, if you think about that if you're trying to do that in 3 swimming pools worth, that's a big mixer.
Oh
And it
my
just doesn't
gosh.
work. It's not feasible. You can't take a giant blender and put it in a swimming pool and then start stirring your batter.
Right.
It won't blend very well. And so we started, looking through the industry literature and stuff, and found that what they have is they have kind of like these turbine-like things that are similar to what you have in an airplane engine, and where the blending is done by pumping it through a pipe, and then it hits these turbines and then gets blended that way. So, it's a orthogonal way of doing the same thing, but a way that's much more scalable than the way we were doing it with the immersion blender.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
so it's kind of those unexpected things that you learn about scaling, where you're like, oh, okay. The other thing that taught me a lesson was that when we buy a reagent in the lab, we buy like 100 microliters, which is 100 millionths of a liter. It's basically 2 drops of it, and it costs $300. Well, suddenly we needed about a cement mixer full of the same substance,
Oh my
and
gosh.
if it was linear, it would have been like $400 million or $1 million for each lot, and there would been no commercial viability to that. But of course, because of scaling, the chemical company won't charge you the same. It charges you a very tiny fraction of the cost that you pay in the lab for the same material.
Sure. That makes sense, right? You're getting a volume discount,
Oh,
basically.
totally. But it's kind of scary if you take a notebook and start predicting what something will cost based on the costs that you were doing at the small scale, because there's
Oh,
no linear translation at all.
right. Right. That's crazy. Yeah. So you're proof positive that challenges with growth are sometimes even more challenging than dealing with challenges in contraction.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Not,
Going
not that
down
we
in
would,
scale would have been a
not
lot
that we would
easier.
want to go down in scale and go back to contraction. The growth is a lot more fun, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So talk to us about the business itself, right? How many employees do you have? Talk about the scale. Clearly, you're an internationally focused business, but give us some more details on the business itself.
Yeah. So I knew nothing of business when I started the business, and that was very clear because we didn't know that we had to pay certain taxes. And early on in the business, somebody came in with a badge raised high and said, "Who's the owner of this business?"
Oh
I
no.
pointed to one of our scientists and said, "It's him." And it turns out we hadn't been paying, I think, city or state taxes, and not because of we were malicious. I had no idea. I didn't have a business degree. I still don't. And so I just didn't know that we needed to pay these taxes.
Yeah.
It turned out all well because as a biotech company, we're just losing money, so we didn't owe any taxes anyway. So they hadn't missed it out on anything. Um,
Okay.
but but again, it was kind of a lesson in maybe there is value to having an MBA when you start a business, so you at least know what you're doing. So that was early on. We went through some expansion and contraction, but now we're still very small. We're very efficient. We have 7 people um,
Oh,
employed here. So we have 3 PhD scientists, no, 4 PhD scientists, then a master's scientist, and then our head of operations who kind of runs all the HR and operational aspects of the business that I don't cover.
okay, but
But
clearly you have a lot of laboratory uses that you require. Do you basically pay for those as outside contracting services or?
no, we run our own lab, so we do
Okay.
all our research ourselves. So our PhD scientists, we have some very nice lab facilities here on the East Lake here in Seattle,
Yeah.
and but we leverage a lot. So most of our like scaling and manufacturing is done in an outsourced manner. So we run we oversee the production and stuff, but it's done at much larger facilities that we pay to do
Sure.
the work. And then our clinical trials right now are being run by a unit called the International Vaccine Institute, or IVI, which is based in South Korea but has a lot of operations in Africa.
Mm.
And so that's how we test our vaccines. So much of it is done through what we call contract research organizations, or CROs.
Okay. Very interesting. So Dr. Carter, what then does the future look like for PAI Life Sciences, let's say over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, right now it's a scary time, admittedly, because our current administration isn't a big friend of both vaccines and neglected diseases. So as a neglected disease vaccine company, we're in a little bit of financial pain right now. But I think in part through the pivot to cancer research, I think we can hopefully make a difference here in the U.S. and get a lot more funding interest. The other thing is, as I kind of alluded to, as we start getting proof of concept of our products in phase 2, people get more interested in funding it. So we're reaching out to family offices, which are an investment type that's not traditional venture investment. They're often foundations they're not really foundations. They're wealthy individuals who want to invest their money in something, but they would like to have what they call the devil bottom line, which means that they would like to make some profit, but they'd also like to do some good. And I think our vaccine fits that thesis very well, because you can alleviate suffering in hundreds of millions of people, but you can also sell the vaccine. And there's a mechanism in the U.S. called the priority review voucher, which if you get approval for a neglected disease in the U.S., you get one of these vouchers, and they're like a coupon from the FDA that says, we will review your product more quickly. And so these get sold to big pharma, because big pharma, if they gain a year in FDA review, that can mean billions of dollars for them. And so what happens with the voucher program is a small company might get this voucher and then resell it to a big company that will then use it in order to save money. And the most recent voucher sales have been $160 million for these priority review vouchers. So
Wow.
our pitch here is, look, we need maybe another 17 to 20 million to get approval of our schistosomiasis vaccine. So you put that in, but then in like 3 years or so, you can get 160 million back for just the priority review voucher, and you can start selling vaccine product throughout the world.
Right. But you need that. You're basically telling a family office investor, I need 17 to 20 to get you 160.
That's right. To get you 160 and to do some very good things in the world. That's why it fits
right.
that double bottom line thesis.
Interesting. I can imagine where that shouldn't be too hard of a sale for you, but I understand that it is. You've got
to. You got to find the right people. Often it's people whose families have been affected by this. So, it's interesting because people from Africa, they know what you're talking about. I mean, I was sitting next to the former health minister of Madagascar in Paris, and he told me a story of a kid that he kept getting schistosomiasis, and he said it was very painful. Every night he would develop these debilitating headaches and stuff. And he almost cried. He said, I've been wishing for a vaccine since 1985, and I am so glad that you guys are this far already.
Wow. So truly making an impact on world health. But you've got to cross those. Yeah, but you've got to cross those pretty big barriers in order to get there.
Yeah, it's not for the faint-hearted.
Wow. Well, we certainly wish you all the best of luck in your journey of trying to get this funding to get these drugs off, toward the finish line.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Dr. Carter, your business is very different from what most people think of a small to mid-sized business, either providing a service or making a product and selling it to, a distributor of some type. And then, you've got so much regulatory and medical testing to go through before your product can even be considered saleable. What advice would you give our podcast audience who are basically small to mid-sized business owners and leaders that you have learned along your journey?
I think that the two things that I most learned, well, there's maybe three things. The one is stick with it, right? I just gave a talk last week, and my end line was, we're a bio company, and I think bio stands for bring it on. So you got to have that energy to deal with things.
I love it.
That's the one. The other is, be flexible. Look where the opportunities are. Don't just have your one idea in mind. If you're making croissants and you start seeing people selling danishes and danishes are outperforming croissants 100-fold, why not start experimenting with making danishes? I mean, it's just like we went from AI to, neglected diseases. I think, being flexible to pivot. And then the final thing is, don't beat yourself up. I mean, failure is an option. And if it does, don't immediately say it's because you were a failure as a small business owner. It could just be the market. It could be anything else. So just keep a bright and happy mind as you do this.
Dr. Carter, I couldn't agree with that sentiment more. And the following up on that is, we don't learn as humans unless we fail. So keep failing, fail fast. That just means you're going to learn faster, right?
Well, yeah.
I think that's that.
I mean, there's a great scientific example in the chemistry field where there was a guy, he was working on a hormone called tetragastroin, which makes your stomach acid. And he was trying to find the smallest one he could make. And he was doing a lab no-no. He was eating pretzels while he was doing this work, which as a chemist, you definitely should not be doing. But he noticed that the pretzels started tasting sweet. And what happened is he discovered aspartame, the artificial sweetener. He turned into a millionaire with his new chemical compound because he was, flaunting lab rules. So, it goes to show you this kind of serendipity can lead you someplace.
Yeah, right. That's a great story.
So he failed at tetragastroin, but he won something completely different.
You succeeded at aspartame. That's crazy. Well, Dr. Carter, thank you so much for your time today, and your journey along this incredible business. I wish you all the best of luck. Again, our guest today has been Dr. Darrick Carter with PAI Life Sciences. He's the founder and CEO. And Darrick, thanks so much for joining us on the Think Small podcast.
Yeah, no, thanks for making time, Rob. I appreciate it.
Welcome to the Think Small podcast, hypergrowth for small businesses. So, what's slowing you down?